Okay, so I've got a very simple drum loop here, and I've got it going to a channel here which has got 4 different plugins, the ones that I've decided to show because these are ones that I often use when I'm making my drums. And first of all, let's listen to that loop in its raw form. Okay, so no surprises there, very simple loop there. And so the first plugin I'm going to show you is something called Orbit. It's a transient shaping plugin basically, although it's much simpler than most transient shapers. There's not as much control as you might get on full-blown transient shaper plugins, but that's why I kind of like it. It's a very quick and easy one to just use and see if it can give you the kind of sound that you want basically. I often use it to make my drums a bit more snappy, make them more prominent, a bit clicky maybe as well. It can work on things like hats and all that kind of thing, on kick drums, snares as well, whatever you want really. So this is one of the things that I do use regularly actually, because it's so quick and easy to use, and it's really cheap to buy actually. It costs I think about £10. Okay, so let's demonstrate this plugin. First of all, I'll play without, and then I'll bring the plugin in halfway through. Okay, so you could certainly hear the difference there. You could hear the kick especially being a bit more prominent. So let's just play that again, and let's be a little bit, I've been a bit conservative with the settings because you have to be careful here. So just to briefly explain these settings, so the mix knob is basically how much of the transient shaper you want to use. If you want it to come in at full 100% or just, you know, blend it in a little bit. The boost basically just accentuates amplifies the signal of the transient shape of this plugin itself. You have to be a bit careful with that because it can get quite mad and distorted if you go too far with it, because it increases the gain basically as well. These 3 settings are basically they're basically like a sort of low, medium and high kind of transient effect. They're just basically 3 modes. The low one you use, mode 1 you use typically on things like kick drums and that kind of thing, low end stuff. This one you would use on snares and things like that, and then this one here on higher sort of frequency sounds such as hats, that kind of thing, if you're going to use it for drums of course. But you could have obviously experiment with this on other types of sound if you want. So let's just play with that a little bit more. Hopefully you could see the kind of difference there when I was going through the modes of how it sounded when I had this one selected, and you could probably hear the kick was a lot more prominent, and then when I switched to that, the kick kind of got a bit softer. It kind of focused a bit more on the snares and mid-range kind of frequency sounds, and you probably heard the snare became a bit more prominent. And then this one, you might have heard that the hi-hats and that were sounding a little bit more prominent as well. So that's the Orbit plugin. So the next plugin is TDR Kotelnyk Off. This is a compressor. It's actually free, and I often use this on a range of sounds actually, but I do use it often on drums, particularly on snares again, to try and get a bit more snappiness out of them. often. I've got it on a default setting here of mastering tight, which itself works quite well, and then I often tweak the settings a little bit just to get it sounding the way I want to. So let's have a listen to that. I'll bring it in halfway again as before. So you could hear that there. That sounded much nicer when you had it there. The drum sounded a bit more prominent. The kick kind of stood out a lot more there as well. It wasn't quite as aggressive as Orbit, but these are probably quite sort of conservative settings, so you can play with these. So let's just play with these settings a little bit now and see what we can do with it. So you can see that kind of brightened up the sound a lot more, and this is really good compressor. Actually, there's quite a lot more you can do with it, so I've just touched on that really. So I'd recommend this compressor in general anyway. It's free to download, so that's really good obviously as well. Pretty good for a free plugin. So the next plugin we're going to look at is something called Punch Evolved. It's a compressor that's based on an old analog compressor, something called the 1176AE limiting amplifier compressor. It's got a range of cool features on it, and it's really good for drums actually. You can on snares and kicks and all kinds of things. You can really shape sounds with this. There's quite a lot you can experiment with this. So. Yep, so that's the Punch Evolve plugin. I quite like that, so I would definitely recommend checking that out. It's really, really cheap to buy as well. So the final plugin we're going to look at is something called Rough Rider, another plugin. This is a bit more of a, I often use this in parallel compression actually. So, and then when I've got the channel that has the compression on it, it's nice because it adds a bit more kind of grit and just makes a drum loop a bit more dirty. So, you know, it depends on what kind of track I'm working on, but for a drum and bass tune, I often use it to just add that kind of adds a bit more atmosphere and just brings out the drums a little bit more if used correctly. It can be quite destructive, so you have to be very careful with it. There's not many knobs, but they do quite a lot, as you can probably imagine. So let's have a listen to it first without and then bring it in. There you go, so pretty good. Made the kick sound quite nice and a bit tighter there. Tightened everything up really, so I really like that. These knobs can be quite sensitive, so you have to be a bit careful with them. But let's have a bit of a play with them and see what else we can do with it. Okay, so that's the Rough Rider plugin, and so those are just 4 very quick ways to kind of just add a bit of excitement to your drums and just make them a bit more exciting and bring them out a bit more in the mix. One way would be to, if you've got drum loops if you've got a drum loop. So I hope that was somewhat useful, and if you like this video, if you found it useful, then don't forget to like and subscribe for more new content that I'll be uploading. So take care and see you soon.